You can trace the whole arc of Bing Crosby's life by reading his addresses in order. The boy from Spokane who hummed along to a newspaper comic strip became, within a single decade, one of the most recorded voices on Earth and one of the richest men in show business. He started in a 5,000 square foot Tudor a short drive from the studio gates. He ended in a French chateau that had once stabled Seabiscuit. Hi everyone, Ken here. Hit that subscribe button and let's dive into a special episode of This House. In 1903, Harry Lillis Crosby Jr., better known as Bing, was born in Tacoma, Washington. His family moved to Spokane 3 years later, and it was there that a young Harry picked up the nickname that would outlive him. He loved a feature in the local paper called the Bingville Bugle, and the name Bing stuck for the rest of his life. He enrolled at Gonzaga University, meaning to study law, but life had other plans. He drummed and sang with a local outfit, and in 1925, he and his friend Al Rinker headed down to LA to try their luck. Rinker's sister, the jazz singer Mildred Bailey, opened a few doors. Within a year, the most famous bandleader in America, Paul Whiteman, had hired the pair, and together with the pianist Harry Barris, they became the Rhythm Boys, the first hit vocal group in the country. Crosby was plainly the star of it. He was among the very first singers to understand that the microphone was not a megaphone but an instrument, something to be sung to rather than over, and the warm conversational style he built around that idea would shape popular singing for the next half-century. A solo career followed, then a radio show in 1931 that drew enormous audiences, then a theme song that announced him in living rooms across the nation. He married the actress and singer Dixie Lee in 1930. By 1933, with Hollywood calling and Dixie expecting their first child, the Crosbys packed up and moved west for good. The crooner was about to become a homeowner. Crosby's first two houses sat in Toluca Lake, the quiet San Fernando Valley enclave that offered two things he needed in equal measure: an easy commute to the film lots and the Lakeside Golf Club practically next door. The first house was a roughly 5,000 square foot English Tudor revival he built in 1933. But the family quickly outgrew it and sold the house in 1936. The second house is the one worth lingering on. In 1935, Crosby bought several acres of an old walnut grove nearby and set about building something grand. He moved in during June of 1936 into a 20-room Southern colonial designed by the architect J. Robert Harris. A long colonnade ran the full width of the front, white columns marching across a deep porch, and the estate spread across about 4 acres with a swimming pool, a tennis court, stables, and a carriage house. Inside, the decorator Harold Grieve gave the rooms a warmth that matched the man. The house was big, but it was never stiff, and it filled constantly with friends, songs, and the noise of 4 growing boys. Because the place was finished in the last year of Prohibition, the den hid a small bar behind a sliding wall panel, a wink at the times that the family kept long after repeal. Bob and Dolores Hope stayed in the Crosby guest house while their own Toluca Lake home was being built, and both families attended the same parish church down the road. For 7 years, it was the happiest of houses, then it was gone. On the night of January 3rd, 1943, the house burned. Dixie had been taking down the bone-dry family Christmas tree when sparks from the faulty wiring caught the brittle pine, and the fire raced through the rooms within seconds. Bing was not home. He had spent the afternoon playing golf with Fred Astaire and then dined at the Brown Derby, and he returned to find 13 years of his married life in ashes. The flames took nearly everything, including his enormous collection of records and transcription discs and a room full of trophies. Wartime shortages of building material meant he could not rebuild, so he sold the scorched lot for around $15,000 and walked away. The house was eventually rebuilt by later owners as a 6-bedroom Southern colonial of roughly 7,000 square feet, and it still stands behind its gates on Camarillo Street. The roster of people who have owned it since reads like a second act of show business history. Among them, Mickey Dolenz of the Monkees, Andy Griffith for 2 decades, and Jerry Van Dyke. It last changed hands in 2011 for a little over $4 million. Within 2 weeks of the Toluca Lake fire, before the embers were properly cold, Crosby bought a vacant mansion in the most rarefied address book in Los Angeles. The house sat at 594 South Mapleton Drive in Holmby Hills, a stone's throw from the 14th fairway of the Los Angeles Country Club, and it had been built in 1932 for a department store president and designed by one of the greatest architects of the period, Gordon B. Kaufman, the man behind the nearby Greystone estate and the architectural face of Hoover Dam. At roughly 15,000 square feet, it was a giant of its day. The exterior refused to sit still under any single label. The front red is a French Norman with a rough stone face and a round tower wrapped around the staircase, while the delicate ironwork of the entrance porch whispered of New Orleans. The white clapboard of the upper story leaned colonial, and the back of the house turned frankly Mediterranean. In lesser hands, that grab bag would have been a mess, but in Kaufman's it flowed. Inside, the decorator Charles Ray Glass chased comfort rather than period correctness, and the result was a house built for living large and entertaining well. The main stair hall carried murals by the painter Alston Clark, depicting the previous family's estates in England and California. The library was paneled in knotty pine, bleached to a silver gray, and anchored by a black and gold marble fireplace. The original layout held 4 bedrooms, one of them opening onto a second-story balcony in the Monterey Manor. And in a touch that says everything about the man's sense of humor, Crosby is said to have kept a cage of monkeys at the back of the property as a low-technology burglar alarm, on the sound theory that no intruder would stick around to investigate the screeching. For more than 2 decades, the Mapleton house was the family seat, and it sat at the dead center of his fame. It was home when he won the Academy Award for Best Actor in 1944 for Going My Way. It was home through 2 further Oscar nominations. It was home in 1952 when Dixie Lee passed of ovarian cancer, and it was home again in 1957 when he married the young actress Katharine Grant and began a second family. In 1964, he sold it, by some accounts, without troubling to consult his new wife first. In 1983, the television producer Aaron Spelling and his wife Candy bought the property for more than $10 million, tore the Kaufman mansion down along with 2 smaller houses on the grounds, and built in its place a 56,000 square foot French chateau they called the Manor, which was, for a time, the largest single-family home in the Los Angeles area. Before seeing the biggest mansions, it is worth pausing here at the peak of his fame to ask how a singer could afford any of this, because the houses were only the visible tip of a genuine business empire. Crosby recorded well over 1,000 songs and appeared in more than 70 films, and his record of Irving Berlin's White Christmas, introduced in the 1942 film Holiday Inn, became the best-selling single of the pre-chart era, with an estimated 50 million copies sold under his name alone and well over 100 million across every artist who ever covered it. The road pictures with Bob Hope and Dorothy Lamour packed theaters for years, but the records in the films were merely the engine. The investments were where the fortune compounded. In 1947, Crosby quietly handed an unsecured $50,000 loan to a small California electronics firm called Ampex so it could finish building a magnetic tape recorder, and he became the first major performer to pre-record his radio shows on tape rather than perform them live, freeing himself from the weekly grind. In doing so, he helped midwife the entire audio and video recording industry. In 1948, he became a principal stockholder in the frozen orange juice concern that grew into Minute Maid. From 1946 until his death, he owned a quarter of the Pittsburgh Pirates baseball club, and the only surviving film of the 7th game of the 1960 World Series turned up decades later in his own wine cellar. He sank money into Texas oil, real estate, mines, cattle ranches including an 8,000-acre spread in Nevada, racehorses, and a television production company whose shows included Hogan's Heroes. Estimates of his fortune at his death run roughly from $50 to $60 million in the money of 1977, the modern equivalent of over $330 million. Now, back to the mansions. If golf was Crosby's religion, the Monterey Peninsula was its cathedral, and in the late 1940s, he built himself a pew. He had launched a celebrity pro-amateur tournament back in 1937, a loose and friendly affair with a clam bake on the beach and prize money he put up out of his own pocket. And after the war, he moved it north to Pebble Beach, where it became the Bing Crosby National Pro-Am. Golfers still play its descendant today under a different sponsor's name. A 2-handicap player himself and a member of the exclusive Cypress Point Club, Crosby bought a lot of about 2.5 acres on the 13th hole of Pebble Beach golf links and built a house there around 1948. The house was a quiet act of rebellion. In a corner of the world where nearly every great estate wore Spanish tile and Mediterranean stucco, Crosby put up a clean 2-story modern residence on a knoll above the fairway, all horizontal lines and open glass turned toward the ocean. It is said to command the finest sea view of any home on the course, and it had its own putting green in the backyard, set right between the 13th so the host could practice between holes. Inside, the house was built for the rhythm of tournament week as much as for family life. Crosby, Dixie, and the 4 boys lived there through the late 40s and into the 50s, and when the Pro-Am came around each year, he threw the doors open and filled the bedrooms with friends. The interiors leaned into the same restrained modern spirit as the shell. comfortable and unfussy, made for a man who wanted the view to do the decorating. He sold the place around 1957, after Dixie's death and his remarriage had redrawn the map of his life. The house still stands above the 13th, though it has been remodeled so thoroughly over the years that it bears little resemblance to the home Crosby knew. Anyways, when Crosby married Catherine Grant in 1957, he marked the new chapter the way he marked most things, with a deed. That same year, he built a fresh estate further out in the quiet of Palm Desert, reportedly as a present for his bride. He kept building and buying houses in the area over the years, so we'll see a bit of each as we continue on. For decades, the story has circulated that JFK and Marilyn Monroe spent a stolen weekend together at one of Bing Crosby's desert houses. The tale has been pinned to more than one of his properties over the years, and the confusion is understandable given how many desert homes he owned. The Crosby family sold one of the properties in 1999, and after a thorough renovation, it returned to the market in recent years, carrying an 8-figure asking price. The romance of its supposed presidential history very much included in the listing. By the early 1960s, Crosby had made a decision that would shape the last act of his life. He wanted to raise a second family far from Hollywood, so he moved north to Hillsborough, the wealthy and wooded town strung along the San Francisco Peninsula between the city and the orchards that would one day become Silicon Valley. He bought 2 houses there in succession, and the way he came to own the first is pure Crosby. The first was an English Tudor Revival manor built in 1930 on 3 oak-shaded acres, a roughly 10,000 square foot house with 10 bedrooms, 10.5 baths, a grand ballroom, covered porches, a heated pool, a 3-car garage, and quarters for a chauffeur. As the story goes, Crosby had just finished a round of golf in town when the homeowners, an early Kodak family, spontaneously invited him for a look. He toured the grand entrance hall with its white oak staircase and its leaded glass picture window, fell for it on the spot, and bought the house then and there, reportedly for around $175,000. Catherine, who wanted to stay in Los Angeles, was said to be horrified the first time she saw it, and Bing promised her the stay would be short. It was not a long tenancy, but it was a warm one. The ballroom became the scene of family sing-alongs, White Christmas included, and the boys ran loose across the acres. The house still stands today and has appeared on the market in recent years with an 8-figure price. It's brushed with the crooner part of every description written about it. Crosby kept his promise to his wife, though, because within a couple years he found something grander just down the road. In October of 1964, Bing and Catherine toured the house that would be his last. This time, it was Catherine who insisted he buy it, and by December of 1965, the family had moved in. The estate was a French Renaissance Revival chateau designed in 1929 by the same architects responsible for San Francisco City Hall, and it had been built for Lindsay Howard, son of Charles Howard, the automobile magnate who owned the racehorse Seabiscuit. The champion himself reportedly lived in a stable complex on the grounds for a couple of years in the late 1930s, which means Bing Crosby spent his final decades on a property that had once been home to one of the most beloved animals in American history. The house was a serious piece of architecture, a whitewashed brick chateau inspired by the great houses of Newport and the garden retreats of Versailles, offering something like 13,500 square feet of finished living space across 4 levels, with 11 bedrooms and more than a dozen bathrooms. It was meant to impress, and it did. The interiors were the richest of any house Crosby ever owned. Hardwood parquet floors ran beneath ornate plasterwork and deep crown moldings, and the ceiling soared. The oval formal dining room was lit by a Venetian chandelier and wrapped in walls hand-painted with a rose garden by the artist Albert Prum. There was a paneled library the family called Bing's Den, and a smoking room with a built-in bar. The Crosbys filled the rooms with treasures brought from the collection of their friend, the newspaper baron William Randolph Hearst, including a carved wooden staircase banister from the 17th century and antique linen-fold paneling. A grand piano that had appeared in the 1956 film High Society, in which Crosby starred alongside Grace Kelly and Frank Sinatra, sat among it all, and the estate later turned up as the backdrop for some of the family's Minute Maid television commercials. Neighbors of a certain age still remember the sound of him singing through the windows in the evenings, and the sight of him strolling through the town's shady lanes after dinner. He lived here until the end. After his death, his widow Catherine stayed on in the chateau, and she kept it as her home until her own death in 2024 at the age of 90. There were other houses, some say dozens, but definitely at least 5 more I didn't show in this video. Many of them still stand, though have been altered over the years. And with that, I'll turn it over to you. Which of his mansions was your favorite? Let me know down below in the comments section, and while you're there, make sure you're subscribed so you never miss an exciting episode of This House.